All right, guys, welcome back to my channel for yet another 2020 interview. Last week, I interviewed the head of this ticket for the Libertarian Party, Joe Jorgensen, and this week, I have the vice presidential part, Spike Cohen. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Jolah. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
We have a very different political view when it comes to fiscal issues, but when it comes to social issues, we're going to be really aligned since I'm a progressive.
Okay, very good.
I think it's really cool to dive into different political perspectives. So I
Mhm.
was wondering, how did you get involved in this ticket? What was it like going through the entire process, meeting people, organizing it, and then winning? And on top of that, how did you and what experiences in your life led you to a libertarian ideology?
So I think I'll answer the first part of that, or the second part of that first, because it kind of leads into the
Mm,
campaigning. So
yeah.
for those who don't know, I started a web design business in my teens back in 1999. And I grew that into a pretty successful company over the better part of 20 years. And then 3 years ago, I chose to retire from that and focus my life full time on my real passion, which is spreading the message of liberty to a public that often hasn't heard of our ideas. They haven't heard of self ownership or non aggression or property rights or those types of things, or at least they haven't heard them within the spectrum of how we believe those things. And so I ended up becoming the owner or the co-owner of Muddy Waters Media, the host of My Fellow Americans, and the co-host of the Muddy Waters of Freedom. And we have tens of thousands of followers across social media, a reach that sometimes measures in the millions. And we have been doing that. We've been using entertainment as a way to spread a message of liberty and freedom to a public that often hasn't heard of our ideas, or they've got a really bad take. Unfortunately, some of them have heard of our ideas and got a really bad take of what they are. And so we've sought to correct that. Getting into this campaign, when I first decided to run for vice president at the end of last year, it was actually when someone you may know, Vermin Supreme, actually reached out to me and asked me to be his proposed running mate for the Libertarian Party. The way our system works, the Libertarian Party chooses the president and vice president separately. So it's not where we just choose the president and then he or she picks whoever their vice president is. We actually have them pick them separately. And so Vermin and I were running as a slate together. And it sort of made sense that I would continue that tradition of using entertainment and using an empathetic and dynamic and engaging way of messaging to spread liberty as far and wide as I possibly humanly could. And so that's what I've been doing the past few months. I've gone to these state conventions and listened to what the delegates had to say and told them about our plan moving forward to spread the message of liberty. I've done college campus tours. I've done door knocking tours in marginalized communities and housing projects. I've done with the COVID-19 lockdowns where everything's kind of been shut down and people don't really want you knocking on your door and the colleges campuses have been closed. I've been doing more stuff online. We've done several college campus Zoom calls with different departments and different classes with colleges, Georgetown University, NYU, UNC Greensboro. There's one I'm forgetting. There's a few, Emerson College and others. And in doing that, I've continued spreading that message. It's been a lot of fun in doing, and it was also a case study in campaigning for the nomination differently than most candidates do. So the way most candidates try to get the nomination for the Libertarian Party is they focus almost solely on what we call delegate service. So the way we choose it is 1,000 delegates, just over 1,000 delegates come together from across the country to the convention, which this year we had online, and they pick our nominee that way. And so because it's real, like low level retail politicking on where you're literally trying to get dozens and hundreds of people to vote for you, it tends to be very in-looking and in very doing calls to each of the delegates, which I did some of that as well, and actually reaching the delegates specifically, each one of them, and talking to them and trying to do that retail politicking. My idea was to actually use my campaign as a proof of concept of how I plan to message the message of liberty outside of libertarian circles. And so the majority of my campaigning was actually outside of the party. And on the strength of that, I was able to show the party delegates delegates that I had the best and most solid plan of those who were running for vice president to spread that message and to get, an unprecedented number of votes and support and new members to the party once I was the nominee. So it's been fantastic, and it's been a whirlwind for the past few weeks since I got the nomination. But it's so far it's been largely going as I envisioned. I guess it's not the same until you're actually doing it, but it's been amazing.
Yeah, so congratulations with all that
Thank you.
success. And with the messaging, so when you hear someone like Verma Supreme talk about things
Mhm.
like free ponies, or he talks about teeth a lot, right? And as
You got
he's
to brush
wearing
your
the boot
teeth.
on
Yeah,
his
you got
head.
to brush your teeth.
Yeah. So are you saying that is really just a satirical way to open people's minds up to the party to get attention and then show them what you're truly about? Is that your grab, sort of?
Oh, it absolutely is. And by the way, I was always, of the two of us paired together, and even together now as we continue to do campaigning for this ticket, that has always been the shtick. He was the more satirical one, and I was the more, serious one. And we called it the Vermin and Spike show. And it was very much like, and I would do humorous stuff, and he would do serious stuff. But my remaining serious for the most part allowed him to stay satirical and not have to break character, for lack of a better word. And so, but with my show and with my shows and with campaigning with Vermin, I use humor and satire when appropriate to reach people who are so disgusted by the state of things in this country. They don't want to hear anything from any politician. They don't care what they're about, which party they're with, if there's something completely different. They see politician, they hear someone pandering to them, they don't want to hear it. And if you listen to the ideas why they've gone that way, they don't even vote. And if you listen to the ideas why they've kind of taken this, like, screw the whole thing, I'm done with it, it's pretty libertarian ideas. The government's out to get us, and I don't trust any of these politicians, and I just want to be left alone. And, I wish they would, get out of my business. Those are all pretty libertarian ideas. And if we could reach them, then we'd be able to bring them in. And unfortunately, they don't want to hear from anyone. If I show up and go, hey, everybody, I'm Spike Cohen, and I'm with the Libertarian Party, and I'd like to talk to you about radical self-ownership, they don't want to hear any of it. So, but by using entertainment, we can get their attention. They're interested in what we have to say. And we've lowered their cognitive defenses, because I'm not some politician, saying the same thing that everyone else has said to them. I want to be a voice for you and all that. They don't want to hear any of that. But their defenses are down because they're just being entertained, and they hear that there's an underlying message there, but they're just having a good time. But over time, as they get more and more drawn in, as we are demonstrating ourselves to be empathetic and trustworthy people, now they want to know what that's about. What is this underlying message about? What is this all about? And that's when we hit them with the message of liberty. That's when we talk to them about our solutions, our common sense solutions to fix the problems that Democrats and Republicans, who have been exclusively in charge for the last 160 plus years, have imposed upon us, and how we propose to fix them. We called it boot pilling them. We get them with the boot on the head and the ponies and I promised them free cheesy bread and all this other stuff. But once we get them with that, then we can bring them into the actual message of liberty, and it's worked amazingly. There are a ton of people. We brought thousands of people into the party already, just on the strength of what we were doing during the nomination contest.
So how far would you say libertarianism and non-intervention, both abroad and at home, go? So I see a point often brought up about the Great Depression and Herbert Hoover, because I understand libertarianism is really about the free market. There will be a way to progress really quickly, and the free market will, in the end, solve it. If there was a scenario like the Great Depression where we see Herbert Hoover as one of the worst ranked presidents of all time with like Hoovervilles, is there any limit to libertarianism in which we would say, okay, the government needs to get involved in some sense?
Well, we look at what caused the Great Depression, and that was the fiscal policy of the Federal Reserve and the banks that were built around that system that were basically leveraging the boom bust cycles that they were manufacturing through the Federal Reserve to maximize their profits. And eventually it hit them too. They created such a crazy boom bust cycle that eventually it blew up in everyone's faces, including the banks. And it led to all the terrible things that happened as a result. It was also coupled with the Dust Bowl, which was something that it largely was, an act of nature. I mean, there were some agricultural policies that led to that, but largely the Federal Reserve was not a function of the Great Depression was not a function of the free market. The Federal Reserve was a function of the government deciding that they would be the sole people that would issue and disperse. They would be the only people creating legal tender, and that was the only thing that could be used as an actual legal tender. And B, moving it away and removing it from any actual tie to value. So now the reason your dollar bill is worth something is because the federal government says it is. But at the same time, they're printing out endless streams of money in order to be able to lend to themselves at rock bottom prices so that they can go fund all the stuff that we would never agree to tax increases for. That's why we have an empire, is because of the Federal Reserve. We would never agree to tax increases to victimize the rest of the world with our military. We'd never agree for the trillions of dollars that they've spent on the war on drugs and the war on sex work. We'd never agree to caging countless millions over the last several decades of our friends and our loved ones for, ingesting a plant or selling sex work services or any of these things. We never would have agreed to that. But so the Federal Reserve created that boom bust cycle, which led to the problems that we had during the Great Depression and the Great Recession of 2008, and pretty much most of those other recession cycles that have happened. So I think the better question there is, how do we let's follow the money, let's follow the policies that got us there, and more often than not, it was either created or made worse by government intervention, as opposed to allowing the spontaneous nature of people voluntarily working in a market economy. Conversely, we see the brittle and ham-handed and centrally planned and crony-friendly nature of when government is in charge of it.
And I think that's where one of the biggest disconnects is. I would say, as a progressive, the problem isn't government, the problem is bad government. And we agree that the government, bad government is bad. We'd rather no government than a bad government.
Than a bad government, right?
Yeah. Your answer would be, let the free market work, stop having the government with their hands in it at all. My answer would be, have the people own the government. But I want to pivot to a little bit of a different issue regarding what's happening today with policing issues and funding of police departments. First, I want your take on the photo ops lately with the Democrats when they took that long knee and they weren't really passing anything transformative. And also, I mean, the Trump Bible thing was a while ago. It wasn't the same issue.
It was the exact same thing. Yes. Pandering to different bases. Pandering to different bases, but the exact same thing. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, no, continue on that.
No. So Trump with that Bible was, as loud of a dog whistle to his base as these freaking politicians who passed or helped pass. I won't say all of them, but definitely Joe Biden. I know he wasn't one of the people kneeling, but they were certainly doing it on his behalf as well. These are the people that passed all the tough on crime legislation that has led to along with Republicans, that has led to all of the police brutality and the horrific things that we've seen, the disproportionate use of force on an exponential scale on marginalized communities, people of color, gender and sexual minorities, religious and ethnic minorities, the poor, the homeless, immigrant communities, and all the other marginalized communities. All of that comes from them, but they put a kente cloth on and kneel down and look at the ground. And I actually put on my Twitter, I had the picture of them looking down. I said, you guys find any legislation down there to end police brutality and systemic racism? No? Okay. So no, total performative garbage. And that is what you will get from Democrats. And frankly, if you want a smaller government and more recognition of your individualism and your property rights and everything, all you're going to get is equal performative BS from the Republicans as well. I think it is absolute garbage. Now, going back to your question about what we're facing right now, Joe Jorgensen and I have a plan of what we call police control, which is basically, it is essentially defund the police, at least at the federal level. And it's also using the federal government, using the Department of Justice. If we believe in justice and we recognize that what is happening in our homes and our communities and to our friends and our loved ones and our neighbors, especially those who are marginalized and in marginalized communities and intersections, in that situation, there is no justice. And so if we have a Department of Justice, what better use of it than to go after the people that are causing the most injustice in our communities? And so we would be very active in going after abusive police officers and in going after, departments that have a long history of abuse and going after them and dismantling where it needs to be done at the federal level if need be. We do believe also in defunding the police at the federal level. We have to end qualified immunity. I've done multiple videos on why that is total garbage, and I doubt as a progressive or any of your audience that I have to tell you why qualified immunity is garbage. It is back to the days of the slave patrols, and it is disgusting, and it needs to end. So we end that. We end the 1033 military surplus program that Joe Biden voted for and that Donald Trump absolutely loves. We will end that because not only is it giving unnecessary military hardware to our police departments, it's giving them unnecessary military training, because when they get that equipment, they also have contractors come in and tell them how to use this breaching equipment and mine resistant vehicles. And it puts them in a mindset that they're using this equipment in the war zone that they go out. This isn't a war zone. These are our neighborhoods. These are our friends and loved ones' neighborhoods. These are the neighborhoods of our fellow Americans who do not feel happy when they see the police. They feel abject fear. The worst fear they will ever experience is seeing police officers. And we want to change that. We want, when people see police officers, we want them to know that the only reason that the police are there is to protect their lives and their rights and their property. And that's it. And so we end the war on drugs. We end the war on sex work. We end the funding that comes in through these military programs. Ending the 1033 program. We end civil asset forfeiture. The idea that the government can take money from you because you're suspected of something without trial, and that if you're actually somehow able to either have the charges dropped or are able to be found not guilty, you then have to sue the government back for your own stuff. That's armed robbery. I don't care. We probably disagree on taxes. I think we can both agree that civil asset forfeiture is armed theft. And so we would end that program. So we are big. In fact, Joe tweeted and I tweeted as well about defund the police. We believe defund it at the federal level, bring it back to where the individual communities are deciding the kind of policing that they want. And the federal government's, the only role that the federal government should have in that is in going aggressively after those who abuse the lives and rights and civil rights and constitutional rights of their citizens.
Mm-hmm. And New York City right now, I think I saw AOC post about this. If you took their military budget, like it's not military, but it is. If you took their budget,
it's a military. It's an occupation.
Yeah. It would be the 33rd largest in the world country-wise.
That doesn't surprise me.
New York's, and that got bolstered because of 9/11, but there was no oversight. Yep. And now they're using that on people, and they have their own basically CIA. They have their own intelligence agencies. So I wanted to hear a little bit about not only that, but also what just happened with the Patriot Act with internet privacy.
So two things there. First of all, the thing that's happening right now where all this stuff that was brought in by the Patriot Act now just happens to be used against everyday human beings that are, in this case, protesting police brutality. There were large groups of people that warned about that. Libertarians and far left progressives. And everyone told us, oh, you just want the Muslims to win and you hate America and you just want the terrorists to win. No, we saw what this was. When you give the government this thing and you say, here's a power for you to use, but only against terrorists, everyone gets labeled a terrorist at some point. And now it makes sense why the government, why Donald Trump, and I'm sure there are more than a few Democrats that will sign up for it if enough other things are added to that specific omnibus. This idea of labeling Antifa a terrorist organization. There is no organization called Antifa. Antifa is shorthand for anti-fascism. And yes, there are some violent groups like the Black Bloc and others that if the violent actions that are being taken by individuals and individual organizations is something that obviously needs to be combated. And we could talk about how the best way to do that. But to label every anti-fascist, including you, including me as a libertarian, libertarians are inherently anti-fascist. To label anyone that would fall within that umbrella of Antifa, basically, anytime someone comes out against government action, they'll be able to go, aha, they're Antifa. And we already know what happens in this country if someone's labeled a terrorist. You don't get a lawyer. You don't get due process. Your habeas corpus already suspended. And we saw that in New York. New York effectively suspended habeas corpus for the first time since the Civil War. The moment that judge told legal aid lawyers that the police could hold anyone that they've been detaining, the New York police could hold anyone they've been detaining for as many days as they want, because there's just so many of them being held, and it would take a long time to process them correctly. That usually is a reason to let them all go. If you're arresting more people than you can process, then that means let them go. The reason they're doing that is because they can use powers that have been given to them by government to be used against terrorists. So I think on these types of issues, we're on the exact same mind. On the issue of internet privacy, I mean, this has been a wearing away that has been happening over a long period of time, because if you have privacy, that means the government doesn't know what you're doing. And so they're going to use, and they'll always, this is what government does. We're not trying to stop you from having privacy. We're trying to stop terrorists or child predators. That's a big one right now. Because now if you say that you're against these actions, they go, do you want to protect child predators? What kind of person are you? We're trying to stop people who want to rape children. How dare you be against this? But of course, we know it's not that we're in favor of child predators. We recognize that that's where it starts. And by the time it's all over, none of us have any privacy. And suddenly the government knows every single thing you're doing. And Edward Snowden showed us they're already doing everything they can to log every bit of everything we are doing at all times. And at a time when we are constantly walking around with a device that has front and back HD cameras on it, we have to have privacy, or we will be living in George Orwell's, worst predictions.
Yeah, it is really scary. I mean, that's what scares me right now. Living in a police state where people are so easily manipulated by propaganda, not only when we're at war and they have little kids from Iraq come and give our soldiers flowers, but they do the same thing here with police officers taking photo ops right before they beat the crap out of
before they beat them up. Yep.
And they have the rights to do it now. They can't get held accountable. They have the military equipment. We are at the point that if they wanted to red bait enough and label everyone like Antifa is the new communist, I mean, it is really scary to think the old fascist Germany thing, I'm just following orders. Seeing that replicated here is becoming more and more of a reality every single day. And I think that's why it's so important that people like us who do differ 100%, like there's probably not one thing we agree on fiscally, but when it comes to pure freedom, like we disagree on positive freedom or negative freedom by government or from government.
Positive rights, negative rights, and all that.
Yeah, but when it comes to this, we need to be together. We need to be united. We cannot be separated on these issues. And right now, going into this election, how would a libertarian party protect things like election privacy and accountable elections to make sure there's a paper trail and things like that?
So first of all, I want to go back to what we were just talking about.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Jolah, you and I are experiencing what people in marginalized communities have been experiencing pretty much since day one, especially people of color and gender and sexual minorities and immigrants. I mean, immigrants, so during the lockdown protests, it was very ironic, I will say, to see some people who were very, very upset about the government telling them where they could or could not go, who I know, I mean, these are people I personally knew, were very much in favor of immigrants being told where they could or could not go, or people who wanted to associate with immigrants being told what they could or could not do, or someone who I married an immigrant and went through that process of bringing her here, and that helped disabuse me of some of my notions about immigration. I was told what I could or could not do as an American citizen because of who I chose to love. And so we are experiencing, we are now as a whole getting to experience what a lot of marginalized communities have experienced. Pride Month, which obviously just started. What is this? Man, is this already the 12th?
It's 11th right now.
Oh, okay, because the days are just going by. But so we're well into Pride Month, and Pride Month started with a rebellion against police trying to stop gay people from being able to, be gay together and be out in public. And Pride Month started with trans women of color picking fights with police officers. Now, I'm not telling you to pick fights with police officers. What I'm saying is that the things we're experiencing acutely now and starting to realize what's coming down the pike are things that people of color have been experiencing and marginalized communities have been experiencing for decades and pretty much from day one. And so that it is a scary thing when the so-called, the privileged community is now experiencing it. It's becoming the status quo of how things are. And it is scary. And what a great opportunity for us to scale it back for all of us. So on the issue of election security, I'm not going to claim to be an election security expert. What I will say is that I am troubled by, we just saw in Atlanta, I think it was mostly in Atlanta, but in Georgia in general,
Yep.
where, they just happened to shut down a lot of the polling places, and those polling places just so happen to be in areas that typically don't vote Republican that much.
Yep.
And whether it was, and it was probably a combination of systemic racism and just good old fashioned gerrymandering through where the ballot boxes are. But we saw a major problem there. So again, not an expert, not going to claim to be one, but I will say that a libertarian government is going to recognize that under the if we are going to have a presumed authority, a monopoly of violence, which is what government is, that it presumes to have control over everyone and presumes to say that the only way that people can participate in this system is to be able to exercise their vote. Then that voting system needs to be protected for everyone, and not just from a security and paper trail standard, which I'm not a fan of these. South Carolina has moved entirely to, I live in South Carolina, and we've moved entirely to an electronic system. And I think, who's counting this? So I do like the idea of having a paper trail, but also the election security, that insecurity that's experienced when you're a convicted felon in most states. Which is why a big part of ending the war on drugs and ending the war on victimless crimes will also be emancipation of all of those people that have those convictions. Not only will they be free, but that record will be removed, and it won't be allowed to be used against them for anything, for being able to vote, for being able to seek employment in something, for being able to own a firearm or anything else. But specific to voting, huge amounts of re-enfranchisement of people. Also at the federal level, I think that there is a constitutional First Amendment argument to be made that if you are a convicted felon for any reason, that there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to vote. And historically, that was the case. That started with slaves being freed. Suddenly they said, well, we don't want them voting. So the easiest way to do it was to pass laws saying if you had a felony conviction, you couldn't vote. And they just find whatever reason they could to arrest black people and give them felonies. And that was really the start. If you look historically in the United States at the start of where those laws started, surprise, surprise, it was systemic racism. Let's keep black people from voting. And if for no other reason, I think that's reason enough to get rid of those laws. So that's where we would stand on voting. It needs to be as open and universal. And the idea that certain people shouldn't be allowed to vote, we should be actively fighting against that.
The reason I brought in elections is because you brought up how America has been like it's feeling for us right now, but it's been like this for people of color, for minority citizens of any kind. Since day one.
Yeah.
So for things like the Electoral College, how would we fix a system like that? Because right now we're living in two completely different Americas. I live in central Pennsylvania, and last week, and even continuing now when they had the curfew, I think it's ended most places now, but at 8 o'clock here, everything was peaceful, quiet. Central Pennsylvania, really rural area. There's no big cities around, low population density.
Right.
We're not hearing any of the actual police issues, the police brutality. The police department here isn't militarized. And meanwhile, in New York, in LA, there's a military going through the streets, and these people are scared for their lives. People walking home from work, getting shot by rubber bullets, losing their eyes, being tear gassed, which is a weapon that is banned in actual combat. And how do we heal that disconnect? And we're ruled by a system right now that allows the people from where I'm from to hold people who are struggling back because we don't directly face those issues.
That is, and this is part and parcel. I'm going to get a little bit into libertarian theory here. We believe as libertarians that the only way that a presumed authority such as the government can keep itself propped up for long periods of time and get worse over time is to basically divide and conquer, keep us at each other's throats, create people who feel like they are victims and people who feel like they are victors, even though the reality is, to varying degrees, they're both being victimized. It's just this group's being victimized more than this group. That's the basis of white supremacy, by the way. That actually started as a political system, a political propaganda system. They knew that eventually poor whites, and it was already starting to happen, where poor whites were saying, this system doesn't help me. This chattel system doesn't help me. I'm not able to find work because you can just enslave that person over there and use them as cattle. And I'm being completely left behind. And I don't like what you're doing to these folks. And so they started injecting the science of white supremacy and basically telling them like, well, you might be poor, but you're white. And that means you're better than this person here. And this person here wants to be set free because they think they're equal to you, even though right here it says in this, in my terrible interpretation of the Bible, or in this fake science book we just wrote, that you're superior to them. And what do you think of that? And it sort of created this class system. And I mean, all of history is of government creating class systems for no other reason than to give people the feeling that they're doing better than this person. So really this system is benefiting them when it really isn't. The system is truly benefiting. We live in a kleptocracy, and it's an oligarchy. It is a system that robs those with the least and gives to those with the most. And when I say those with the most, I don't mean, people that have, 2 cars and 2 houses. I'm talking about people that are at the up, not even the 1%, the probably 0.01% of people, the well-heeled cronies, the politicians, the most powerful and wealthy people on this country and on this planet, who have created a system that disproportionately harms marginalized communities, but is harming all of us for their direct benefit, both for their wealth and power. And so with all of that said, the way we heal those divides is by showing that this is not a you versus us. Whatever we disagree on is fine. But if we remove the coercion angle from it, and we say that you're allowed to simply believe what you believe, and I'm allowed to simply believe what we believe, and we can freely associate as we wish, that does a powerful thing towards removing the divides that are there. Those divides exist because we aren't just arguing over preference. We're arguing over which side gets to tell the other side using the force of law what to do. And that becomes a completely different discussion. And that's another reason why we're libertarians. In terms of messaging, our messaging is going to be very clear. Whatever your skin color, whatever your position in life, whatever situation you are in, the Republicans and Democrats have failed you. If you are in a marginalized community, the more intersections of marginalization there are in your personal identity in life, the more you're being harmed. But the reality is, unless you're, a handful of politicians, cronies, or incredibly wealthy people, you're being harmed by the system. And we want to remove those systems of harm. We want to remove the politicians and the cronies from the equation of you trying to live a better life. We want to make people have freer and safer and healthier lives, and for their children to have a brighter future than right now we could even possibly imagine.
Yeah, that's really interesting, comparing that to progressivism, how it's focused somewhat on classism and racism, and how the oligarchs use it to control the people at the bottom in order to work against their own what's going to be good for them. And it's really interesting how the 2 main parties in the US are both authoritarian, and every party that's libertarian, and we saw this with Ron Paul first. Bernie wasn't the first person. I think a lot of people think that because they're usually my age, which I'm 20. They're usually my age or younger. They don't know about what happened to Ron Paul, and how the media did the same thing to him, maybe even worse, that they did to Bernie Sanders. The entire system, if you're trying to be a libertarian, they're going to force you out economically. They're going to try to, like they did to Dr. King, try to make you depressive in the mental state and try to tear you apart.
Hampton and
every leader of those movements is going to be absolutely sabotaged, just like Bernie did twice, and he's falling in line right now. But just to wrap it up here a little bit, there's some topics I didn't get to talk to Joe Jorgensen about, the presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party. And those issues are how immigration would function and how we would take care of climate change.
Very good. So let's do the immigration one first. Joe and I believe in reopening America to all the immigration and trade that any of us would want. I believe that we as libertarians believe that, and you going back to the, I guess, propertarian libertarian argument, we believe that migration controls are a violation of your right to host or hire or house or associate with whomever you wish. It's none of anyone's business, and it's also a violation of your right to travel where you are welcome and be associated with and hired by or hosted by or housed by whomever they wish to do. It's none of the government's business, and there's no reason that the government should be involved in it. In fact, and for those, constitutionalists, I don't know how many constitutionalists you have watching, but the founders intended unlimited, unregulated migration. The only system, even back when they only wanted white people who owned land to be able to be citizens, they still thought, if you're able to come here, we don't care. Anyone can come here, come and go as they please. It is, and in fact, the entire system of migration control, not just here, but worldwide, is really something that only started post-World War II. You saw certain pockets of it at times, especially between countries that were at war with each other and things like that. But this idea that all countries have these very hard and drawn out national borders, and you can't cross them without the right papers, that was a post World War II thing, and it became more and more popular during the Cold War. And I will say, I know you're a progressive, but it was labor progressives that pushed that notion of the economic protection angle for not allowing immigrants, because it would, increase. In fact, Bernie up until recently was very much a migration protectionist, because from the argument that it would lower wages the more immigrants came in, even though the data shows that's not true, which is probably why he changed his position on that. But all of that to say is, we as libertarians believe that people should be able to come and go freely as they want. That is none of the government's business. And it feeds back into our basic ideas that you own yourself, you own your life, you own your body, you own your labor, you own your property. Anyone trying to take any of these things from you or harm any of those things without your consent is a violation of your inherent and intuitively recognized self-ownership. And migration control would be a perfect example of that. Climate change. Let's look at who the biggest polluters are: the government, the military, and its well-heeled cronies. And then they turn around and message to us that it's actually our fault because we eat beef and we might drive in a non-hybrid. And meanwhile, all our cars are hybrids. But we are told that they basically turn around and counter shame us. They tell it, well, it's your fault, it's your personal choice. You, John Q. Public, who is you, Jolah, if you had a hamburger this week, then you helped contribute to climate change. And meanwhile, the people that are messaging this are part of, these are people in media who are part of the handful of crony corporations that own most of the property in this country and are doing most of the heavy polluting. So climate change is very much a propertarian thing. If you get government out of it, if you get government out of the subject of climate change, or really just out of the subject of the environment, now you can sue the people that are being protected by the government right now. Now you can actually go after those people. Here's another major contribution to climate. In fact, well, let me continue with that, and then I'll circle to the other one, because I want to make it clear what I'm saying here. The EPA's largest role and the federal government's largest role is in carving out protections for their favored cronies, where they don't have to worry about this specific type of pollution, or this area where pollution has happened, or if they do a big spill of some kind, they have to pay a fine to the EPA, and that's it. They're indemnified against any kind of lawsuits, which would go way above the fines that they faced and would necessarily cause them to go out of business, which, if that was in place, if they knew that screwing up could make them go out of business, they'd be a lot more careful in the first place. So here is a perfect example where government stepping in to help has actually made things worse, because they stepped in to help their cronies and keep them in business. So here's another big thing that we don't talk about. The regulatory burdens that have been put on businesses in the US has contributed to them determining that it's actually cheaper for them to form relationships with authoritarian governments, dictatorships on the other side of the planet, have it made there by slave wages, and then brought back here, shipped all the way back here to be sold to the person who lives next to the plant where it used to be made. And they did this for a very specific reason, because the cronies and their major corporations could afford to move all of that over there and afford to create those relationships with those dictators. Whereas small and medium businesses that they competed with couldn't. They had to go out of business or find something else to do, or go to work for the cronies. That's why they did it. It was not worker protection. It was not environmental protection. It wasn't any of the supposed reasons. It was to help the cronies. And what have the cronies done? They've gone over there and bolstered dictatorships. They've increased exponentially their carbon footprint by now the thing that could have been made there and brought over to the store there, and then me buy it and bring it back here, now is being made thousands of miles away in a place with no environmental regulations, and then shipped on tankers back here, creating literally probably hundreds or thousands of times larger carbon footprint. So doing away with a lot of those regulatory burdens that are entrenching poverty and making it more difficult for less well-heeled entrepreneurs to get ahead and to move their way up the economic ladder. And then there's a whole conversation to be had there. But just doing that would not only help reduce climate change quite a bit, it would also harm those dictatorial governments that have built these relationships with Western crony corporations, and it would help economically here. It would bring back a lot of jobs and investment here, and to the places where a lot of people have lost their jobs in recent years due to that offshoring of labor. So there's many things that could happen there.
Yeah, that's where the big disconnect is with us. You have a lack of faith in government, and I have a lack of faith in the free market. Even if the products were produced here, I would never think that they would reduce their emissions by any reason other than public pressure. And I mean, I guess that would be an active force. But as far as moving different factories overseas, I would enact like policies personally if I was, whatever. But like Norway or Denmark, I'm not sure if they still do this, but where they would charge a price to ship products back in, not a tariff. I forget how exactly it was done. But when you have the most lucrative economy that ever existed in the world, you're allowed to make certain demands. So that's where the big disconnect is between us. It's the faith in government or faith in the free market. And
I
I
don't
mean,
have a tremendous amount of faith in the organization that gave smallpox blankets to natives or crowded them into reservations or did the Tuskegee experiments or
oh no.
if you look at our history, I don't have it. And I think probably our disconnect there is you believe that if we put the right people in charge, we could change that long term. I believe that the system itself is ripe for it because it is a centralization of power and wealth. And in any system where you centralize, the greater you centralize influence and authority and power and wealth, the more likely the people who both seek that and make their way to the top of that will be corrupted by it unless they are actively working to decentralize it.
Is there a plan for
But
money in
I like what we
government?
do agree on, though. Sorry, go ahead.
Is there a plan for money in government? Because I think that's the biggest issue.
I think that you know how you get rid of the cronies? By eliminating the money path. So here is why cronies go where the money is. And right now, where the money is in a government that can print out endless trillions of Federal Reserve notes and use them on whatever they want because they don't have to go to you and get you to let your taxes be increased for it. They just print it out. And that's the most insidious way to tax someone, by the way, because now, not only if I'm doing that, not only have I created this, huge debt that you and your children and grandchildren have to pay off over the next 30, 40 plus years with interest, but every time I print out trillions more dollars, and I don't add any corresponding value to that, I am reducing the value of each one of those dollars, including the dollars you have in your wallet and in your bank account and anywhere else that you have money. And in doing so, that is why since 1913, when the Federal Reserve was instituted, we have seen this change where prior to that, the cost of living would go up and down with supply and demand. Now, the cost of living is always going up because the money supply is always being inflated without any corresponding value being added to it. The market will always respond to actions happening, including those by government. And so now you have a debt that you have to pay back with interest on things that you would have never agreed to: empire, systemic racism, people being put in cages, camps on the border, things you would have never agreed to have your taxes increased for. You're having to pay for it with interest, and your money's losing value over time as a result. So one of our biggest things is auditing and ending the Federal Reserve and moving the issuance of currency away from the monopoly of government and towards a competing market where competing providers can compete to give you different types of currency that they have a vested personal greedy interest in giving you the best type of currency that will hopefully either gain value or at least not lose value over time because they want to get their cut when they give that. And what it also does is it takes the cronyism out of government, because now government can't just simply print out endless money to give to their cronies. Now, if I have funding and revenue, it's because I've convinced you and everyone else that it's absolutely necessary. I can't do an end run around you. And it becomes markedly harder for those cronies to show up in my ear and go, you know what, I'll fund your campaign if you get them to pay trillions of dollars for this thing. I can't do that anymore because I have to now convince you, which is going to be way harder than just printing out money and giving it to them.
Yep. So we agree what the problems are. So overall, right now for for the Libertarian Party right now, will you guys be on the ballot in all 50 states? And how can people help third parties in general develop?
So last cycle we were on all 50 states. This cycle we are already on 38 of them. And there's a bit of a challenge to the fact that some states have ballot access requirements that we have to get, in some cases, tens or even hundreds of thousands of signatures, of petition signatures, which in this environment of COVID-19 and lockdowns is functionally impossible. And so we're actually suing those states for ballot relief, saying that, because of the nature of the pandemic and the lockdowns, which, I mean, we could have a whole conversation about how the CDC allowed this pandemic to happen and how Trump completely failed us on that regard. But because of those conditions and the lockdowns and everything else, and the fact that people really don't want to get together en masse and sign a bunch of petitions and sign something that everyone else has already touched, we're suing and saying, because we qualified in 2016, then we believe we would obviously be able to qualify for 2020, and so we'd like to be on the ballot. We believe those ballot access requirements are violations of our constitutional rights, but at the very least, we want to get ballot access, and we're actually working with other third parties in some states to do that. In terms of how can third parties do better? Because I think if you're a far left progressive, even if you've heard what I've said and said, I am utterly horrified at the idea of this man ever having power, but I agree with him on the nature of bad things that are happening in government, then I would say that you probably should be voting Green Party, right? Like if I were a far left progressive, I would not be voting, or even just a progressive with a conscience, I would not be voting Democrat. I would be voting for something other than this. I mean, I hope you vote for us, but if you voted Green Party, that would be fine as well. I think that third parties, in order to be able to work together, or able to get ahead in this duopoly, this Republican-run crony environment that we're in, we have to subvert the system. We have to use social media. When we do get those times of national media attention, we can't show up and be nice and respectable. We have to put it back in their face. We have to force them to challenge their own views and get the public's attention in doing so. We have to take every single opportunity we have to be able to subvert a system that has been created by, in my mind, one single party with two parts, the Republican Party, that has been running things for over 150 years now and has put us in the situation that we are in. The only way we're going to be able to get around that is to come ahead. And if we're able to get on the debate stage, and if we're able to get on all 50 ballots, I will be speaking for progressives. I will be speaking for the Democrats that just cannot bring themselves to vote for Joe Biden, or even the ones who just are holding their nose and hoping that some other option comes up one day because it's just getting worse and worse. There are options. I will be speaking on behalf of all the people who know that this system has left them and their friends and loved ones behind.
Yeah, great. I learned a lot more about libertarian ideology in this interview, a lot on policy with Dr. Joe Jorgensen. Thank you for joining me. But to finish this, please let people know where they can find you, where they can find your entire campaign.
Absolutely. So our website is joj2020.com. So that's joj2020.com. My Twitter is at Real Spike Cohen, and my Facebook is it's Spike Cohen. Or if you in the address bar, it's facebook.com/literally Spike Cohen. And if you look for Joe Jorgensen anywhere on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, anywhere, you'll find her. And obviously the Libertarian Party, anywhere you can find them. If you like what we had to say and you want to find out more, if you're interested in it, we'd love to hear from you. We would love to have your support in November. Again, even if you don't agree with all of our policies, I would hope that we could all agree that we are a market improvement from the Republicrats, and we would love to have your support and your help coming into November to change things for the positive. Thank you for your time.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you.